All right, perfect. All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. And this is our CSC Leon Software Solutions Work Group meeting number 2, Tuesday, March 22nd, 1 p.m. And we will call to order at 1:02 p.m. officially starting. I will ask Ms. Jacinta if you wouldn't mind taking roll for us. You're currently on mute. Okay.
Okay, I'm going to call the roll so that we don't get the feedback. So roll call, Eddie Gonzalez Luminier.
I'm here.
Marcus Johnson. Corey Melton.
Here.
Darren Toston.
Here.
Terrence Watts.
Here.
All right, Mr. Chairperson, we know that Marcus Johnson let us know last week that at our last meeting that he would not be available this week. So we do have a quorum and can move forward.
All right, perfect. I believe everyone received the agenda prior to this meeting. So we'll next discuss the approval of the agenda. And if we review that information briefly, the goal of the Software Solutions Work Group is to inform the development of a formal procurement process to acquire and build information systems for the efficient operations of the Children's Services Council of Leon County. So to this end, the work group will develop the scope of work and timeline of activities, plus make recommendations to the council on who should serve as subject matter experts on the evaluation team for the procurement process. Today's objectives are to review a selection of essential components for that procurement, including goal statements, work plan phases, evaluation criteria, and proposed schedule of activities. In the packet that we received, it also includes a draft of those essential components, but also a copy of the original request for the request of information to RFI and a sample information systems map from one of the sister CSCs, which we may use or may not, which could prove useful. So I do need a motion to approve the agenda presented. Have a motion?
Move to accept the agenda as presented.
Second, this is Eddie Gonzalez Lumia.
Perfect. So motion by Mr. Toston and second by Mr. Eddie. Perfect. So we'll move on to the next agenda item. Do we have any public comment submissions?
We have no public comment submissions.
Okay. All right. I'll move on to my next topic here. So next we'll talk about work plan development. But before we dive into the essential components that we did receive email, we'll ask Ms. Sika Rose Green if you would briefly review the components of the RFI. That'll be helpful.
Okay, absolutely, Mr. Chair. So just to remind everyone that our goal is to acquire and implement an integrated system of software solutions from one or multiple vendors that will ensure that the CSC is efficiently managing its various processes, including, but in no way limited to, the grants management piece. So we're currently in the market research phase of the endeavor. And in addition to releasing the request for information, our team also is meeting one-on-one with vendors who responded to the RFI. And that we are doing to gain a better insight on each of their perspective on system design as well as application. So the list of functions that I'm about to share is the starting point, but may not be the ending point for this process. So we are looking for a software solution that can do grants management, that can have decision support and project management, that allows for a customer relations management piece or CRM, can possibly handle finance and accounting, and then also a case management component. So these functions include, as I said before, grant publication, application tracking, award notification and reporting, invoicing, disbursements, contract management, and task flows. Budgeting, financial, and outcome reporting by investment priority area and by partner and as a whole. Also a predictive analysis, and I know this is a lot, data collection, relationship management, and if we're fortunate, possibly opportunities at the program level to input data and run de-identified reports that would roll up into the community reporting system. So in addition to these dreams, which we know are ambitious, we want the system to integrate with the data displays we are building right now through our needs assessment, and to support some level of process automation to keep our benchmark data current and accessible to the community. We also want to work with our community partners on understanding their data needs and uses so that we create a tool that is complementary and not duplicative to what they're doing. And lastly, we want to explore how CSC Leon can use a data system to also serve parents more efficiently and effectively. So in other words, can our website also include a portal specific to parents to help them navigate the various services available as they need them? So this is why your expertise in the work group is essential to the development of the work plan. So are there any questions before I turn it back over to our chair to explore the essential components of the work plan? And I'll do my best to answer those questions in Holly's absence.
Ms. Sika Rose Green, this is Eddie Gonzalez Lemieux. The only comment I would make, and it was sort of alluded to, is integration or interfacing with other systems. And naturally, systems like dashboards or portals, for example, there may be a partner, a third-party partner that would want to bring in, that we would want to share data with so they can display on, their website with proper approvals. But then also the interfacing and integration between, from a billing perspective, from a reconciliation perspective, usually they call that electronic data inter exchange, which EDI, and I think it was in one of our packets. It was in our packet in the diagram in the back, in the sample where they mentioned EDI. So that's just something I wanted to mention, just share.
Okay. Thank you for adding that, Eddie, and you can call me Sika.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks for adding that in there as well. We know this is really ambitious, what we're looking for, but we also know that we won't do it all at one time. We'll have to do it in phases. And as I think Holly has said previously, we're not necessarily looking for something that would be customized, but rather kind of off the shelf with all of the pieces being able to work together. Any other questions or comments? Okay, so I will turn it back over to you, Mr. Chair.
Sounds great. Well, I'm very excited for the discussion today. After going through, I couldn't wait to see what some of the experts on the group have to say and feedback to provide, and probably will answer some of the questions that I have personally. So if you guys want to, if it's okay with you, we can either we can start off by discussing some highlights or flags or things that you identified, or we can also then go into some of the topics that Holly presented to us that she was hoping would come out of the discussion as well. So I don't know, you guys have any opinions? You want to start with some of your ideas? Go by each RFI, or any proposals? All right, perfect. So, go ahead. Yes.
No, I was about to say fine. I mean, if you wanted to go by each RFI, I'm fine with that. Or I know Sika kind of listed off a number of features that you want this solution to have. So I don't know if also there is like a priority list in which you have, in which, the features that she kind of ran off that you have in mind also, which kind of would help us with evaluating those RFIs. So.
Okay. All right. I think I saw a head nod too from Mr. Eddie. So if that works, is that okay with the team? We'll go that route. So let's start with the first one, well, in my order, which was Blackbaud. We want to start there. Is that okay? So what things stood out to you all as far as what the CSC is potentially looking for when you review Blackbaud's information that possibly stood out, let's just say as a positive? If anything.
I think one of their strengths is more on the financial or accounting side, right? So, which naturally is a very important piece of the RFI and the eventual, RFQ or RFP. And so naturally with the RFIs, there generic terminology that they provide, but that's something that stood out was the accounting piece. They did mention data extraction, which is what I alluded to a little bit earlier with Zika. It looks like they have a pretty robust training program, which is important as well. And other than that, that's the comments that I had related to Blackbaud.
Okay, perfect. And I thought too, after going through a previous process like this, I did personally learn that, sometimes format is also not everything. So I was trying not to just look at, the packaging. It's a lot more what has to deal with the, content. And so with Blackbaud, and I went to the website as well, I thought that it was maybe very clearly presented how they could meet each particular item of what the CSC was looking for as it pertains to the RFI. What I did possibly have questions for with this team is sometimes being so large. I feel like they were maybe like the largest submission, and with something that we're looking for, a more local approach to things. I don't know if their package was just pretty and everything was well on point, or if it was really like, I don't know how to articulate that, but it seemed like they were maybe not as community focused as far as their approach. I don't know, but I did like the testing description. That's one of the things that I feel like is really important for the process is what the groups have to offer as far as testing, because that budgeting, the limited resources that the CSC, and trying to be mindful of those resources. If we have a product, what does that testing look like for the group, for Sika, her team, and things that come out after they leave? What does that connection look like with Blackbaud? So once they've rolled out, the testing's done and everything, then what does that relationship look like afterwards when things come up, right? So I didn't know that.
Yeah, I agree. I think part of the messaging, it's about, this is local, right? We're trying to keep things local at a local level. Relationships are extremely important. Partnerships very important. Often, there are benefits to small businesses and benefits to larger businesses. Are we going to have a partner in this process that also understands from a localization perspective and a community perspective what we're trying to accomplish as a CSC? So I agree with you. Yes, Terrence.
Eddie, I think that's a great point, and I don't know if this is something that we feel like needs to be explored as you. I think this was one of Holly's questions, but should that be a particular section of the submission of how they locally?
I mean, I think with any organization similar to this organization, how the partnership would work is important, right? I mean, I think this is truly a community effort. In my opinion, I wouldn't just have a vendor-client relationship or a contractor-client relationship that can only go so far. There'll be challenges as we try to accomplish amazing things with, budgets and aggressive timelines and those factors. And oftentimes our partners have to be there by our side, enjoying the successes, but also overcoming challenges together. And so the organizations that are responding to these opportunities, hopefully will have some examples of where they were there side by side with their community partners. I think that's really important because there will be challenges. And we definitely, I don't think, at least in my opinion, we want someone to implement something and then kind of move on to the next thing. As Sika mentioned, this is going to be a phased approach. You know, we're gonna do this little by little, the best we can, and we're gonna need someone there by our side. And so I'm sure some of these respondents have examples of where they've had to overcome challenges and they've been able to work really together, not just a vendor-client relationship, which I don't think, in my opinion, we should just be looking for.
I think a question to ask also, I know some of them have stated that they have worked with CSCs, which I think is great, particularly ones in Florida. But I would also want to know if they, kind of to Eddie's point, if they started when the CSCs, there were any that had started with them so that they weren't coming in the 5th year or the 10th year where things were pretty settled. But it would be, I think, good to know when they were able to grow with them, because at that point, they also probably have some good advice to offer on how things may have worked well for others or didn't work well. So I think that would be a good point to look at.
I agree with that as well. You have any other feedback for Black Box strengths, weaknesses, other ideas that, okay.
I believe out of all the vendors that we've seen so far, from a personal standpoint, I've worked with Blackbot in a previous situation. I would say that in regards to them and their support and training, they did an excellent job. However, one of the things that the company that I was at that utilized Blackbot, they also had staff that various staff that can handle such thing as development. So they were trained on how to make customizations to the tool. So, you know, similar to what Eddie said, we have to make sure that we understand what their commitment is to this solution after go live. Well, they have somebody that will be able to support if indeed CSC doesn't have, you know, that type of staff on hand to be able to handle those situations.
And if I might interject, Mr. Chair, at this point, we do not have plans to have a staff person or a team member who would serve in a chief information officer or IT technician type of position. So what Mr. Toston is saying, what Darren is saying is definitely important, as we will be relying on the vendor to help us when we get in those spots until such time, if we ever grow to a point where we have a position that becomes the on-site expert with our software.
It's funny you brought that up, because as I was reading this, I'm not gonna lie and tell you, I wasn't thinking like Sika might need to put that in the toolbox. You might need to bring it. It's probably gonna be a very important aspect ongoing to the success of the CSC, the whole data piece. And so, you know, even figuring out contracting with someone outside to maintain it would be more, I did think about all that. So put that in your back pocket. Did anybody have anything else on Blackbot? All right. So awesome. And I know they're taking notes. One other question I had maybe for the group on them was the conversion process. I don't know if this was something I thought about, and I don't know if I fully understood it, but it was referencing, it sounded good. So I just wonder if it's something that we should be looking for, like all of you know, moving forward. But and it talks about the conversion rollout is divided into test previews, test runs, and a final conversion run. Each test run has a set number of goals and tasks, including mapping, implementation, validation, and approval. The process is repeated for each conversion delivery. That sounded really good. And I didn't know if it was something that one of my questions about what happens afterwards once it roll out, if that's something that's a robust process that will continue to follow and how that works. I don't know, and if that's like wrapped into the budget process, or are we talking about like an additional fee, contract, subscription, or something along those lines? So without having an IT person or someone in that role, is that something that with this process, we would look for them to address what that looks like if they're proposing that you're going to want that ongoing resource? I don't know if that made any sense, but anybody have any? Yes.
I have a question on that. So when it's talking about conversion, I mean, what is the CSC currently using that will need to be mapped and all of that into the system?
So at this point, we don't have anything.
That's what I was thinking. So I didn't know if this would be a huge or not so big of a lift.
Well, and we were trying to use that kind of as a talking point that we literally would not have any conversion data that would need to go over. Now, we do expect to have some expedited grants that will happen this summer as of June 1. And then, of course, we will have also a grant period that we hope to start so that we have grants on the ground starting October 1st. So it wasn't totally accurate that we won't have any conversion data. And then the second piece to that is all of the information that is gleaned from the needs assessment, particularly the IPI, the Informative Programs Inventory, will probably be information that will need to be converted into this system as well. So we didn't quite anticipate that when we were first doing the RFI and talking this through.
And is there any data from the programs or from the grantees that you would ever want to pull into the system?
I think so, and I think it would be from the IPI. So it would be data that is provided to the research company, to QQ, as they're building that IPI. We could possibly want to put that into the system, especially if we're looking at capacity and funding levels and staffing, and even going so far as EDI. So if we're looking, and this EDI, I'm talking about equity, diversity, and inclusion, as far as what the populations look like. So there could definitely be a need for that, and I would imagine we would.
Okay.
Yeah, Terrence, the only thing I can think of is, there's going to be some sort of maintenance and operations after this thing is live, at least the first phase. And, sometimes when they propose that maintenance and operations, they will assume that the CSC has an IT team or a person. And in that spirit of partnership, they may have to go with the extra mile, or at least consider that in the proposed budget, that they may have to do some tasks that they may not have to do for other customers, because the other customers may have a full-fledged team, and we're not there yet. Kind of to what Corey was alluding to, we're starting. And so I think the proposal should include the typical maintenance and operation to keep the software up to date and, protected, antivirus, all of that. But there may be meetings that someone may have to attend on behalf of the vendor with Sika and team to represent, quote unquote, the information technology team, even though it's kind of like an outsourced model, until there's the appropriate opportunity to hire a person or two. So I think that's important as well.
Last thing, I'll tag on to that too, just thinking of even how we operate here in our office is, there's one or two of us that are more of the champions, if you will, of the system. So we're definitely not engineers, can't go make any system level changes, but kind of take the lead on the user side, knowing how to do that. And so whether it's additional training for one or two people or kind of having somebody special for that, I think that will be important until you are at the point where you have somebody on your team locally.
I agree. And I can also have, I've also seen models where, you have a piece of software like Blackbaud, for example, and they provide their maintenance and operations, but they don't provide more than that. And where you may need to contract with, for a few hours a month, potentially, for a managed services IT shop, and there are many of them in our community, to provide that general IT. These companies, they are really good at what they do, and sometimes they say no to things that are outside of their wheelhouse because they're just, I think we rather them say no because they're not that great at, they'd rather them be honest and focus on what they do, which is these types of software. So there may have to be a two-prong approach potentially for general IT type work. And of course, our community has many of those options available.
All right. Any other feedback or comments? All right, we'll move on to the next one, which let me see what I have on my list. All right, MTX, strengths, barriers, questions.
So from an MTX perspective, just, in following technology overall, they're involved in multiple industries. And I think they're another successful company. They've obviously, they've experienced significant growth during the pandemic as they've developed software, implemented software for, public health agencies across the nation. And I'm not sure specifically if it's contact tracing, but at the end of the day, sensitive data. And so I think they're out of Texas. They do have representation, I believe, in the North Florida area. And when I think of them, I think of a custom solution shop. In other words, you can go to them and they can provide a lot of what you would have in a list of requirements, right? In other words, they do more than just what we need, which could be valuable. Learning from other industries, learning from, other markets and other communities. But they have been growing significantly. They are doing more in Florida. And so that's something also to consider based on what I've seen in terms of market research and of course, just regular online, searching.
All right, that was great. And any other feedbacks on MTX? I probably had the most questions on this one. I thought that the CRM, the customer relations management section that they had was probably the most articulate, but then it led me to ask questions for the CSC. It seemed like a lot of their processes, just how Eddie described them. So they're talking about partnering with third-party platforms. Mm-hmm. Okay. And so you're talking about, I think it was Salesforce, Mule, and then again, so I don't know if that's a positive or a potential for the CSC.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. And so Mule would be, and Salesforce, obviously, the CRM piece is important. The Mule piece is what kind of integrates and creates interoperability between different systems. And there have been discussions that, this solution may require more than one, piece of software integrated together. There may not be one that solves everyone's problems. So that's the positive side. The potentially negative side is, the management of multiple parties involved in a project. That could create additional work for the CSC staff. It could create additional work for an MTX if they take the point, almost like constructing a building where you have a contractor and that contractor is kind of responsible for the different subcontractors that are trying to build something. And so that could be the other side of the situation as well. But it's something to consider, at least to have in the back of our minds, because they have done, enough research to believe that it will take more than just one organization to provide all the solutions. And there's some worth there in understanding that they may be right about those assumptions. And I think that's important versus another vendor that says we can solve all your problems. I'd rather someone be honest in their opinion, of course, and provide assumptions like this.
And that's why I couldn't form an opinion on it one way or the other, because, I just, you would hope that they have those examples, like I think Connie was saying as well in the group earlier, that they have those examples where they've worked with other ones and can show where, hey, partnering with so many different other resources is going to be to the CSC's benefits because of X, Y, and Z, and then communicating that clearly, to the group. Does anyone know, I also thought about this. So those are additional subscriptions, I think, right? Does anyone know if MTX, when they proposed in the budget, right? Because you're talking about CSC being responsible for that as well, being responsible with those resources, are those additional ongoing subscriptions? So you have to subscribe to Salesforce, subscribe to Mule. Are these like additional?
That's a great question. In my previous experience with something similar like this, you would want one invoice from an MTX and let them take on the burden of consolidating the subcontractors' work. But that's a very, very good question. Does this mean we have to have separate contracts, relationship, legal arrangements with different organizations? What if one of those organizations, has trouble or decides or is merged? Of course, that can happen with any organization, but it is definitely something that should be asked. Absolutely, it's a great point.
So if I may, Mr. Watts,
Yes.
This is an excellent point. And I will tell you from my previous experience when I've worked with, and not in an IT space, so in a different space, when I've worked with a vendor that has had to use or the best solution for what we needed is by combining products from different companies. My desire is that my relationship is with that vendor, and that vendor manages those other relationships with those companies and those products. And if for some reason, as Eddie said, there's a merger, the company goes away, in my experience, what has happened is that the vendor will come to me as the client and say, we were notified this company is not going to be doing this anymore. They've given us this window. We've already started investigations on another company that will step in and will let you know what that price is. So if it turns out that it would be different subscriptions, we will definitely have in the RFI or the ITN that our expectation is that the vendor would manage that and we would only be responsible to the vendor.
I think you want to do that too, because there tends to be finger pointing. If you're the one dealing with all the multiple vendors, somebody needs to be ultimately responsible to you and let them deal with the others. So.
Absolutely.
And
Sorry, Terrence.
Yes. No,
I was just
go
going
for
to
it.
mention, adding to what Zika was mentioning is, we've seen the word E or the acronym ERP or Enterprise Resource Planning Solution. That's usually the type of solution that encompasses different modules under one umbrella, right? And there's some large names that we've all heard of that are ERPs, but it has a finance module, an accounting module, an HR module, and usually history shows that these organizations that are ERPs, what they did is over time they acquire these companies and then under their name, and so and they're some of the largest companies in the world, and at times can be pricey, but I agree with what Sika mentioned and Corey mentioned is that relationship. Unfortunately, we don't have the manpower to be able to have to take on the burden of handling or managing the different folks that are involved. It'd be good for the prime, right? The prime vendor to handle that.
Perfect. Any other feedback, MTX?
The only other feedback that I give is in regards to item number 6 and their timeline for implementation. I know in our first meeting, one of your concerns was, how soon could you have a solution in place? And I think they kind of spelled out each phase of how their implementation process would go, and kind of detailing what they would need from CSC and what your role would be in regards to each one of those phases. So that part kind of stuck out just a little bit more as compared to the other vendors that were presented.
It's a good point as well. Anybody else have any feedback around or opinions on the timeline that they presented? All right, any other feedback? I don't know why I circled this under the timeline too, but for some reason I circled MTX offers a standard post-launch support package with a duration of 2 weeks. And
I was just noticing that. And then it has the subscription period after that. So
yeah, just other things that probably when the process continues to develop, I think there could be a lot of potential hidden cost. I mean, I don't know, but that did stand out for some reason.
So maybe when the RFP is, when that's created, is there's different levels of support post integration. So like it's saying here, it includes this, but not that, cosmetic issues, but not workflow updates. So I think we probably need to take a look at all these and get some help from you guys to put levels of support.
Any other comments?
And if I might, just so that I'm clear, maybe in the RFP, we would ask that they either describe levels of support or detail levels of support from maximum to minimum or something like that, so we can really compare apples to apples when it comes to that, because that post-launch support is going to be vitally important for us. I say it all the time. I'm an English major and know just enough about the software that we use to be productive, but I definitely can't go in and work the bugs out like some of you that are more knowledgeable about it. So that is, I'm hearing that recurrent theme, and I have it starred all the way through my notes. So would that be a good way for us to maybe approach it in the RFP as we build it?
Definitely, because that's where you can call it in the end.
Absolutely.
All right, any other comments for MTX before we move on to Unite Us? All right, perfect. So we have Unite Us. I have a few notes. I'm gonna just open it up to the group first. What were your thoughts, feedback, comments?
First, well, I'll let others go first. So, I've heard of them before as well. Modern, I consider them kind of like Web 2.0-ish. And what I mean by that is that the technology, I feel like the technology would have a very good look and feel, right? Whereas at times, some of these types of technologies take you back to the 2000s and 90s, right? And so I feel like it's using, and based on, what they talked about for their license management and some of the details around, the software and the platform and how they do single sign-on, they're kind of in tune with what's very popular in the market, especially in other industries. And I love the fact that they're they're focused on community type organizations, and they're bringing modern technologies based on what we've read and what I've seen online. And it also looks like they have worked with local organizations that we would have to work with, right? Obviously, county, whole child. I mean, there's a few organizations names there that we recognize, which of course it's going to be good to understand how they work with them and what they've done together. But I think that's important. And I also know through different trade groups in this community that I think there's someone in the North Florida region as well that represents this organization. And so I'm just assuming may have a good perspective of what is needed. But I'm the dashboard, the data feeds, the words sound really good, right? And I know they're words, right? It'll be great to see examples and screenshots and diagrams, really geeky stuff that'll help us make those decisions. But the cloud infrastructure, they're using Amazon Web Services, they're talking about interfaces. It looks promising.
Any other comments or feedback? I thought too that there were a lot of good words, and I went to the website. I like the idea of it. I think one thing that stood out, I know that they referenced some of the groups that they partnered with, but I was almost maybe wanting to know how, what exactly does that mean or look like? And so I think it's going to be important that that somehow is developed and discussed when this process moves forward, because it's almost like that platform, how I understood it, is possibly only as successful as how many folks are actually, or groups are actually, integrated
right
in their platform. So I mean, the whole idea of, it's set up and we can do a referral and there's this process. I mean, all that is great, but I don't know. This was my least. I don't know.
No, I think that's a great point. I think it's as it grows, the people that are participating benefit more from it, right? In other words, if you've got one person, I'm just going to the extreme. If you got one person on the platform, you're sharing, you're doing stuff with one person yourself. But as that community grows, I think you get more benefits from it. I also think, the referral process, or being able to pick up the phone and call the people that they've listed in their RFI and eventually RFP, right, I think would be great. They list, like I mentioned earlier, they've built a framework across the state of Florida, Leon County, right? Whole Child Leon, Capital Area Healthy Start Coalition, Sable Palm, all these organizations, United Way, that we know very well. Be great to know who their contact person is and what is it, how did they work together, right? Because as we all know, I mean, there's different ways you can work with an organization. Did they actually implement a solution like this for any of these organizations? I mean, that would be great to know. That they're down the street, right? And so I think that's important as well.
So if I can chime in just a little bit that I know about Unite Us, I don't believe that it's that, how do I say this the right way? I don't believe the relationships with those groups that we know here in this area are in the capacity where they offered a solution for them. And so for full disclosure, I participated in a just kind of a meet and greet meeting when I first got here with Unite Us. And quite frankly, they had tried to have that with me when I was with my previous organization. And so it is what I've seen. It's a referral process. It's a way to integrate and pull organizations together so that when a client comes in one door, you're able to get as much information as you can, You provide them with your resources if you have them. And because of the information that you glean, you can now send resources to the other providers that are signed up into that portal. So I don't think it's that they've built something or deployed something specific for these providers, but rather these providers now use this portal as one of their ways, and I want to emphasize that, one of their ways that they help their clients, so that the data that is reported in Unite Us would only come from the clients that are done through Unite Us. But if there are clients that did not come through that system and were not put in there, then that would be separate. I hope that made sense.
It really does.
Okay.
It absolutely does. It's similar to, hospitals are part of clearinghouses and they have multiple that they're a part of. And a patient may be in one of those networks, but they may not be in another. And it does make sense. And it doesn't mean that, the CSC may have a use to be partners with them in the future for a component of the overall tech ecosystem. Okay, makes very good sense. Thank you.
I was wondering kind of to where Eddie ended up right there is, maybe if that's the case, then Sika, and good to know that maybe it would be good to know how easily something like a Unite Us would integrate with the larger system that you're looking at now. So, I think that would be maybe a thing to keep in consideration, because I could certainly see value in that.
And by the way, they may have strategically submitted this response to get on our radar for their particular use case, right? Even though they can't satisfy all of the requirements that we may have.
Well, I think it said that they didn't have to be able to. So another question backwards to them might be, who are some of the other systems, have they integrated with a Blackbaud or an MTX or a
That's a great question.
And how easy was that for them and the end user?
Any other comments or feedback on Unite Us? Nothing else? All right, going to the next one. And so this one is Web Author. And I will open it up for comments, feedback. I'll say on this one, I thought they did the best job, and and again, I'm trying not to be biased, because just like with was it MTX, there could be strengths in having the different partners and resources. So I didn't want to get blindsided when I was reading Web Author and all of their partners' successes, and partnering with other CSCs and possibly in a one-stop shop. And then I went to the website, and so the background, I think, is very much established that they know this work. They have the capacity to possibly do this work and be what CSC needs. But I'll just start there before I go any further. Anybody else have any other comments as far as?
When I first read it, I was thinking this is 1995, this is going to be old technology and old servers under someone's desk, right? Which is nothing wrong with that. But I was pleasantly surprised where they do talk about Amazon Web Services. They do talk about modern technology, which is great, which means they've changed with the times, which is something to remember or think about. And then, you go to their website and it says the all-in-one business application, which, by the way, is deceiving in a way that if you look at their customer base, heavy on education, healthcare, and community, right? And so if I was their marketing person, I'd say all-in-one business application for those types of organizations, because you can tell it's nonprofits first. It's exactly what, we're talking about ELCs here, the Children's Trust. These are a lot of folks that, one can pick up the phone and say, tell us about your experience with WebAuthor and also the stories that you have. You can tell that they may have over the span of, 20 something years, they may have thought, well, let's potentially get into another industry, but they're staying in their lane, which I respect a lot. They're really staying in their lane, even though that software can probably be used for other solutions. We definitely would not be a guinea pig. I'm sure there's a lot of reusability, which I think is important in our community, where other CSCs and other organizations can, they invest in something, but long-term they'll get some benefits too, as we continue to invest in that. And there's this community feel to it. But I was very impressed with their preliminary information.
I will point out, I just noticed this on page 4. It says our pricing model assumes that our client site project administrator take an active role in ongoing configuration process. So just kind of FYI.
I saw that as well. You guys tell me what your thoughts are on this. So like the one system, I also thought that with all of those groups that they're involved with, and possibly what the CSC is attempting to accomplish, that integration opportunity there for, if it's allowable, that data that's already out there that they possibly have is probably, when you talk about the CSC's goal of out of the box, ready to go, I think they kind of nailed it, possibly, that resource is there. The SAMIS, that's short for something, particular system, I think that gets the CSC quicker, possibly, with the direction. But that was another one of my notes about and this ties back that, that with that whole budget piece, resources piece there, I think they're heavy on licensing. I respected that they put in the number of how much it costs per hour if you're going to do something, additionally. So those things I think will help. If you have that information from all these groups, also hit two birds with one stone around what that looks like for the CSC long term before you even make a decision on a particular group, weighing is it more cost effective to have someone possibly on staff or contract with someone, or just have a group that says, hey, if you need us after our agreement runs out, this is how much it's going to cost you, per hour. That is very valuable to have up front in some type of discussion.
Yeah.
Now, so I'll pause right there.
I honestly think that we would learn from them. I think the CSC would actually learn from some of the things that they've experienced over the years, which I think is a great thing, right? They may have seen things that the folks on this phone call and staff members and future staff members may not have experienced. And I think there's value there. It may not have anything to do with technology, by the way, but just by looking at the roster of customers and similar, like-minded organizations, we may learn from this Florida-based company. And I always like the fact that they're in Florida, because he can get in a car and say, hey, what's going on? But no, we understand these are RFIs. It's information on paper, Terrence. But this is a complete response.
I would have to agree with that. This is the most detailed response out of all the vendors that we saw, and even going back and having references in which we can look at and kind of see the types of work that they did in their body of work. So.
Any other comments? Back to page 4 too, I highlighted this. They did a good job on the technical. They put in here, we don't want to make you technical experts. I mean, it's like they've had that experience with other groups and like, hey, this is an area of interest and we're going to tackle that. This is how we tackle it. We got it covered. I thought that was good. I also thought they did a good job with their CRM description. The sample data, I mean, here was a question I had, so this is for the group. So WebAuthor has a robust reporting and data visualization tool, but the platform can also integrate with Power BI, Tableau, or other third-party reporting tools. And the dashboard is configured to the needs of the clients. And so that's on page 5. I thought what's that, MTX? I thought if I'm accurate, I thought what MTX was articulating, I thought that they covered it as well in this, but I could be wrong.
No, I think you're right. I mean, you don't want the data to be hostage to one solution. And so we as a CSC may say, let's use the open source Tableau or SAS or some solution to look at analytics or data science. And we should be able to ping that data and run reports. Even as something like Excel, we shouldn't have to be handcuffed by the application, and that data should be available or exposed, of course, securely to a third-party solution. And another one of the vendors mentioned Power BI. That's another solution. These are visualization type solutions that it's only as good as the data is available. And so as long as the data is not in some sort of dungeon, like I like to call it, it's good that it could be exposed to a third-party application. We may receive a grant to run analytics and they're providing a tool. Well, we want that tool to be able to hit that data in a relatively easily fashion without having to, call up the partner or the vendor and have something custom made. That shouldn't be necessary. It's our data or the people's data. Yeah.
All right. Any other comments, feedback? Nothing else. So it's okay with the group. Give me 1 second here, and I'm going to pull up my little, see if we can, if it's okay with the group, see if we can answer some of the things. For example, are there system functions that we should add or delete based on our experiences? And so this is on page 9 of the actual handout of the agenda. So if you guys looked at page 9, of the, it would be the R5. If we looked at page 9, you guys have any, this is the 5, so you talk about finance and accounting, customer relationship management, grant funds management, decision support project management, and case management. So this is what we as the CSC are putting out there, that what we're trying to look as applications to acquire and implement. You guys have any feedback on things that we should add or delete, even based on this discussion?
So the only thing I can think of, and I think, Terrence, it would fall in several of the categories, is third-party integration. And so naturally that impacts number 4, reporting. It impacts number 5, C, reporting under case management or referral tracking. And so it's a generic or general concept of, and I think all of the respondents mentioned interfacing or integration, but with third parties. And so I think that's important to put somewhere, I believe, integration with third-party capability.
Okay.
We're going to have to interface with all types of different systems. And what we don't want to do is have seeker staff have to download data into a directory and then go manually type it in another system. We've all been there, right, in our lives, where you have to take data from one system to the other and you do it manual. We don't want to do that. So I think that's one addition that I can think of.
All right, perfect. Eddie, on that one, and the description that you gave, I'm sure everyone was taking down notes. So when they have that, if they decide to add that, we'll know what there'll be a description of what specifically, okay, what specifically that means and what, okay, all right,
Yeah.
perfect. Any other edits, additions, suggestions for page 9? That was a really good one. I'm going to ask one more question as far as page 9. And Eddie just kind of touched on it, how even that particular recommendation could fit under multiple sections. Did you guys find anything on here that maybe made more sense under a different section or the formatting or anything like that?
Mr. Chair, I just want to let everyone know that Holly has joined us via the phone, so we're glad that she has landed safely. She and her family are back home, and so she is listening in and may chime in as she gets a little up to speed. We've got a little less than an hour left in our call, in our Zoom.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Hi, everyone, and my apologies for being late. I was able to live stream a little bit being connected to Wi-Fi, so I've heard part of the conversation just listening in on YouTube. But thank you for allowing me the flexibility to be so late, and I'll turn it back over to you, Mr. Chair.
All right, sounds good. So any other feedback? Page 9. If not, we're going to move on to my next notes here. Any other feedback? Okay, all right. And then next, definitely what we were hoping to accomplish from here, are the statements comprehensive and descriptive enough for what we hope to accomplish? So should we add, delete, edit any of those on page 10? I personally, I did not have anything for this, but open it up to the floor that you guys have any feedback, edits, or additions, even from today's discussion, something that we might want to include or remove.
And if I can, Mr. Chair, what we'll also do is make sure that we go back and look at this recording. Jacinta is taking notes, as am I, and we can even go back to the recording to make sure that the discussion is reviewed to ensure that if there are places in these goal statements that we need to either be more clear or we need to ask for additional information to accomplish some of the questions that came up, we do that. And then we will bring it back in front of the committee so that you review it. We're good before we actually take it to the council for approval and go through that whole process.
Okay, that's perfect. Thank you. All right. I'm going to move on to the next one. Are the work plan phases descriptive enough and adequately timed? So this is going to be on page 11. I even think that Mr. Darren references some of his feedback in one of the presented RFIs about the timeline. Did you guys see anything that stood out to you that might need to be revisited? And then again, like Ms. Sika said, we will definitely get, after the notes back out and something may resurface. I can tell you that one thing that stood out to me, I just put a question mark by it from my own personal experience, which was the testing and evaluation. So this is the stakeholders assess the quality and functionality of the proposed solution. So for internally for staff, testing and evaluation, we had December. And then for provider and stakeholders, I assume that means provider and stakeholders in the community, testing in January. I almost maybe had an opinion if the provider stakeholder training testing should actually almost be at the same time of the December year. I don't know that you would want to wait. You may have someone on the team that's, an I keep calling her Connie, but Corey. Kind of reference, she's a champion. I wrote that down. Typically, you have in a small group, you have someone, hey, I'm going to be a champion of this new rollout, this new process from A to Z, where I can have a little bit of knowledge to be able to test all of it, and provide feedback. I just didn't know if we wanted to wait to start testing what we are anticipating the stakeholder platform would look like a year later. That was the only thing that stood out to me.
So, so when we're looking at testing and evaluation, and Holly may jump in here. I know she's not looking at it, but she's knows this well enough. She may jump in. I think that when we're looking at that internal and the internal CSC Leon staff in December of 2022, I don't know that we're trying to wait too much longer into January before we have that provider stakeholder testing, but I definitely don't see any reason why we couldn't maybe start that in December when we're doing it with our own team, especially because our team is a pretty small team. And then maybe kind of keep it going into January, keeping in mind that it's the holiday time, and what we don't want to do is a lot of planning and then have to replan. So I see Holly has her hand up, so I'm sure she has even more information on this.
It's really just to echo what you said, Sika. Having done kind of a needs assessment survey, we know that our provider network, a lot of them check out for those 2 weeks in December. And really that was internally making sure we have everything kind of ready internally, that we're happy with what it looks like before we put a product out for testing. Another thing that we did with the needs assessment that I think would be helpful in the kind of designing of the implementation and rollout is small focus groups or small groups of different provider types and sizes for them to understand how the system works, and then to give us that direct feedback. So I really envision that kind of testing and implementation and evaluation to be multiple weeks and months before we actually truly develop a training. So any tweaks that need to be made. I think even with the needs assessment process, we learned a bunch in our original testing phase. And then even in implementation 6 weeks later for the provider survey, there was a lot of additional things that we learned throughout the process. So I know we want to be way more intentional this time round of the types of users, if you will, that come and test the program, and giving us a much wider window to implement those changes before we roll out those trainings.
Perfect. Great explanation. And any other additional comment?
The only thing that I would say on the phases part, and we talked about it with all the vendors, trying to determine or make sure that each or whoever the selected vendor would have a post-go live phase. So I don't know if you want to add a support and optimization phase in there or something like that. Just to have that, visually represented on your chart.
All right, thank you for that, Darren. Holly, that is great feedback. Yes. Any other additional comments or feedback on page 11? All right, we'll move on to the next one. And again, something may come up afterwards. You will have a chance to provide additional feedback. Is the schedule of activities too aggressive, not aggressive enough? So this is going to be on page 13. And what are you guys' thoughts on those dates? If you have any, again, you have another opportunity to provide some feedback, but that is the potential timeline goal.
Mr. Chair, if I might, I wanted to point out that it looks like you skipped over the evaluation criteria on page 12. Was that purposeful? And if so, I'll be quiet.
It is purposeful, because believe me, I have notes on that one. So yes, I'm gonna get this one and then we can, yes, perfect. Any feedback on the actual timeline? Aggressive, not aggressive enough? Is it a safe assumption for the team, for Sika's team, that also this timeline is possibly from previous experience with something else or other sister CSCs? Yes, okay. All right. Oh, I see a hand raised. Yes, Ms. Holly.
The schedule that we did put together, it was kind of combining a similar RFP ITN that went out from our sister CSCs in St. Lucie, as well as the experience that we had with our procurement with the needs assessment, building in a little extra wiggle room, trying to anticipate, again, lessons learned from the needs assessment procurement, that like publishing the dates for the demos, et cetera. And I know that we kind of looked at that schedule of having that. So if vendors are selected to come and do those demos, they know in advance. That was some feedback that we received through the needs assessment process, that if there was an expectation for some face-to-face demos or face-to-face negotiations, which we did do with the needs assessment, that we wanted to make sure that was all published up front for any potential vendor. So that's where this generated from.
Perfect, makes sense to me. Any other comments or feedback on that one? All right, so the next one that I wanted to say for last, which is the evaluation, the page for scoring. So this ultimately, this group here, this is, the evaluation team that is chosen, and the companies, the groups that move forward to that process, and they go through the scoring. This section, in my opinion, is very important because it weighs and makes a determination as far as scoring of possibly who moves on to, if you will, final rounds to be considered, moving forward to provide the service to the CSC. And so if you have any feedback or comments, you'll see what the current scoring is, which will reach 100. If you feel like certain items on there should weigh more or less, don't hesitate to give that feedback. One question I had too is even after our discussion today, some of the things that we feel like might even need to go into, what we send out. Do you think that now that information possibly needs to find its way on the actual evaluation scoring sheet as an item that should, have some scoring and weight to them? So any questions on that small speech?
So are you thinking like maybe adding some points for ongoing support and what that looks like?
Totally. So I literally put that one should probably reach 20. That should probably reach 20 in my opinion. Cost probably should reach 20. Training services should reach 20. You can probably roll implementation services down to 10 and vendor profile to 5, but I'm flexible. These are just my ideas and my thoughts. It's whatever the group finds important. And I chose those for two reasons why I feel like they might have a significant weight, is based on the CSC's needs. When we're thinking about when it rolls out, and that there won't be, an IT position or whatnot. And we're going to be looking at someone that's willing to partner with, that they're able to articulate that they meet that need or are willing to meet that need and can provide in their, submission how they plan to do that. I thought that would be valuable. And then also the cost. So this is just maybe my own ignorance, but again, when you're talking about possible third-party groups or, what does that look like? And should you for someone, if you're submitting to someone with the intent that they have no knowledge about IT or the processes, that in layman terms, we can understand that this is what this looks like, you know, if you choose our service, and they can understand that, you know, from a CSC perspective, budget-wise, X, Y, and Z. So those were my ideas.
Mr. Chair, could you say that again, as far as the categories and what you would suggest those points to be? Thanks.
Sure. So I was thinking for the vendor profile, that's the first box. It's currently up to 10 points. I felt like we could probably reduce that to 5. And then implementation services, which is the 4th box, currently up to 15. I felt like we could reduce that to 10, which would then allow us to increase training services to 20 and cost to 20. I also saw a message from Mr. Darren. I think it would be important to add it. Any other thoughts, opinions?
I think that's reasonable. I think your suggestions, Mr. Chair, are good ones.
I have one to add, not necessarily for the evaluation piece, but just kind of going back to the ongoing training and support. Something that's been very helpful to us, because our software here is specific to chambers, are user groups, and the ability to get together with other chambers who are using the same software. We've learned as much about great things to do in our work unrelated to the technology, just through working with them, or how they've used the technology in different ways. So it would just be a good question to ask if they have that available.
And I think that's great. And I see a message from Holly. That any other additional comments, feedback, ideas on the evaluation page? Criteria, should I say? Nothing else?
That's good.
Okay, so I'm going to pause there before I attempt to move on to the next meeting item and make sure, Holly, I know you're just joining, and Sika, is there anything I'm missing that we should discuss before I move on to the next agenda item?
I don't think so. I was looking at my notes that were so wonderfully prepared for me to follow, and it looks like we covered everything we needed to. If you will allow me just a personal point, I cannot thank you all enough for serving on this team. I was taking copious notes so that we end up with a very robust RFI, ITN, to get this council what it needs to be able to move forward. And we just look forward to your continued participation in this capacity for us. So thank you so much. Holly, do you have anything you want to add?
No, thank you again. I want to echo, not to be a parent of what Sika's saying, but having had independent conversations with most of you, and just excited to see this moving forward and the expertise that you're bringing to the table. And I'm bummed that I didn't get to hear the 20 minutes of the conversation, and so I'm looking forward to going back to it. So no, just another thank you so much for serving in this capacity, and allowing us to squeeze as much out of your brains that we can.
Perfect. So what we'll do next is discuss the next meeting date, which, if this is, I believe, is Wednesday, April 6th at 12 p.m. and it will be through Zoom. Okay, all right. The next topic will be our next meeting agenda, which will be a discussion from today. So if I heard correctly, there will be a review, even some of the questions that we just went through and some of the pages asking for additions, edits. This recording will be reviewed. Notes are being taken, There will be information provided to this group from today's call, but then also in the interim, if something triggers after that you feel like, hey, I feel like maybe that's some information to edit or whatnot, you can email that to the team, and we will have that information ready to discuss April 6th. Okay. And so now we're going to open it up. Does the work group members have any comments or closing thoughts?
Just appreciate getting the materials ahead of time and being organized. And thanks to everyone, Holly and the staff, for preparing. This was nice. It's good.
Thank you. Thank you. And does anyone else have any other additional comments or feedback? Well, I enjoyed the discussion. I learned some things. So it doesn't, I feel like we've been on it for almost an hour and a half. It didn't feel that long. So if nothing else, meeting adjourned. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.